Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Feil. I'm one of the two co-founders of DataStax, and welcome to the startup panel. One of the things that we do at DataStax is provide our software for free to startups. And we do that with the goal of getting more people familiar with the software, getting feedback on what's good and bad. Usually they tell us more about the bad than the good, which is actually good. A great quote is, "Bad news is good news. Good news is no news, and no news is bad news." Think about it. It's good. And up on the stage today, I'll let everyone introduce themselves in a second, is a group of people who have worked very intimately as a part of that program, as well as with the software. And we're going to keep this relatively free flow in terms of some questions about what you've experienced, what you don't like, some recommendations for the greater audience, and we'll see where it goes. This is a rather intimate audience, so if you have any questions or comments, please yell. Raise a hand first, but then scream. And we would love to incorporate that feedback. So why don't we go from right to left on our stage and introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name's Eric Lubau. I'm the CTO and co-founder of SimpleReach. Been working with Cassandra since point 2, which, if I remember correctly, is before Riptano, which is also before DataStax. So I have a very long and storied history with it, and I've watched it grow up over the years, and as anybody who may go to my talk tomorrow, have encountered the absolute worst of it, but has also enabled my company to do what we do today. So I'm pretty pumped about some of those things.
Why don't you give a couple seconds on what your company actually does?
Sure. So what my company does is content analytics. So we help publishers and brands and agencies and e-commerce companies get the most out of the content that they create or provide.
Great. I'm Sam Bisbee. I'm the CTO at ThreatStack, a Boston-based company. We do continuous security monitoring for Linux servers that are typically deployed in clouds like Amazon. Pretty much the vast majority of our engineering team had never used Cassandra prior to working at ThreatStack. So that was an interesting experience. We had also been scaling up as a time series data company, trying to shove over 100,000 inserts per second into Cassandra, 2 terabytes a day. And so learning how to operationalize that and then also delete data efficiently was pretty interesting.
I'm Ilya Barak. Work? Yeah? No? Okay. Yeah, I'm Ilya Barak. I'm the CTO for Channel IQ, and we do e-commerce intelligence for brands, for compliance monitoring, and for where-to-buy solutions. I've been working with DataStax since version 0.8 at another startup. So my startup was acquired by Channel IQ, so I've had the privilege of taking our Cassandra knowledge and incorporating it into another team that hasn't had that knowledge.
My name is Sebastian Estevez. I actually work for Matt at the startup program. I man the startup program from a technical perspective, so all these guys get help from me on kind of an ad hoc basis. And hopefully some of you guys on the audience also already do or will.
And to put more flavor there, Sebastian has an interesting job. DataStax as a corporation is an enterprise company, so we sort of count our customers by the hundreds, if not low thousands. Whereas with the startup program, you have a large number of companies come in, and he is the only technical person, except for you who recently joined, who works with all of those hundreds of accounts. So the interesting thing about what Sebastian gets that no one else at DataStax gets is that you see hundreds of customers on a month-by-month basis, and you get to solve all their technical issues. So needless to say, he's a little crazy from time to time. So getting into this, what I'd love to actually learn a little about from each of you is, what was your original motivation for getting into Cassandra? Like, what could you not do with something else out there? What could you do better? And why don't we follow that up with, what was your first surprise interacting with the software?
First surprise? I'll skip the 0.2 stuff because way back before 1.0, it was a surprise if anything worked. So as of 1.0, The biggest reason that we actually got into using Cassandra is that we had some serious, like high velocity, high volume ingestion issues rather that we had to take care of. So, you know, we started out with trying to do counters in Redis. Then we moved to Mongo. You know, we looked at Couchbase, we looked at HBase, we looked at basically anything else that could be used as to count things we did, and then quickly found out that the hardest thing to do in computers is count. And when you talk to people who are non-technical, they don't believe that, but that's actually, I think, the reality. So we've spent the last couple of years trying to figure out how to make Cassandra count things very well, and I think mostly thanks to Sebastian, we've figured it out.
And just to give some perspective, you mentioned large write ingest and counts. Throw some numbers on that.
So in terms of counters, we do about, at peak, we do about 400,000 counter operations a second. At lull, we do maybe about 100,000 counter operations a second, and each counter operation could be anywhere from, you know, one increment of 200 cells to maybe, I don't know, a couple thousand increments on a couple thousand cells on a single row. And that's just on one table. So, you know, in terms of volume, we may not do a whole hell of a lot of volume compared to some of the companies out there, but we happen to do it with like very, very difficult data structures.
So one of the big first issues that we ran into was we went through implementing roughly every anti-pattern in the data model that you could, because we had all had experience on effectively every other database, quote unquote. So, you know, we're a multi-tenant platform, so we implemented multi-tenancy at the column family level, and we just completely drowned our cluster in files and tables. We quickly learned, we never ran into the counting problem because we had other solutions for that, but pretty much everything we were doing was pre-materialized views. And that's actually been pretty successful for us so far. We've had great success either very wide and shallow schemas or very narrow and deep schemas. So either a schema that drives a very specific widget or a schema that will drive, for example, go look up a process fork event on a given environment and then contextualize that against everything else in that process tree, every network event in that process tree at that point in time, but then also historically over the last 30 days and go pull that all together. Yeah.
So one of the problems we've had, we've also done a lot of the anti-patterns. We built a pretty complex queuing system in Cassandra. Nobody should ever do that, and they should use something like RabbitMQ that we learned quickly. We've done other crazy things like attempt to store sessions in Cassandra for .NET. Probably should also not do that. So it's definitely been, you know, a learning experience since 0.8. And for us, you know, originally we started looking at Cassandra when we were first building our startup purely because we knew we'd be processing a ton of data with a ton of updates as we tried to index a lot of content online.
So you don't deploy something directly. Why don't you give some insight into some of the common use cases you see, why people start to use the software, and then some of the common things you see people make mistakes on?
Yeah, sure. So the folks that sign up for the program are divided largely into two camps. There's folks that have a system in place that's running on a database and it's close to falling over or is already falling over, and they need to make moves. And then there's the camp that kind of has heard about those experiences and read about them and are being proactive in building a system that's going to need to scale and doesn't need to yet. And you know, those folks usually have a lot more time to figure out how to do things the right way. Cassandra surprises me all the time, right? Actually, yesterday I learned something about TTLs and SS tables that I wasn't aware of. Specifically, that if you change TTLs on an SS table, it only affects writes that are coming after the fact, right? So little things like that will always keep coming. But one of the important things that I'd like to kind of make everyone aware of is just that Cassandra and DSC are both very tunable. They have a lot of levers. And one of the ways to be really successful with the products and get things to work well is to find out what levers to use when.
So we talked a little bit about Cassandra and what you guys are doing there, but at DataStax, there's an enterprise-grade edition of Cassandra that you guys have access to for free. That software includes things like search capabilities through Solar technology, analytics through the Hadoop stack, as well as Spark. It also includes things like performance package by doing things with main memory, security, and then Op Center. Can you guys talk briefly about which of those features, if any, you're using and what your motivation was for using those over other things in the field?
Sure. So we use Spark, which is part of the Hadoop stack-ish. We use Solar, and I think that's probably the sort of extent. We also use Op Center. Sure, we use Op Center.
Can you go with why and what you do with it?
I'm getting there. I was trying to think while I talk. I'm not good at multitasking. So the reason we use Spark is that one of the things that is an issue with counters, and like I said, we count a lot of things, whether it's counting page views or counting unique users, and we count unique users by using something called HLL plus, which is hyperlog log plus, which means we store bits of data in very large sequences. Also something Cassandra was not built to do, an anti-pattern that we've fought, that Cassandra fights us on regularly. So in order to double check ourselves, we use Spark. Spark is a framework that allows us to run against a large amount of raw data and check our aggregated data to make sure we're approximately correct. We also use Solar. Solar is a full text search engine. And we do it not just for text, but we also score articles and we score some of the content that we check in very interesting ways. And we use Spark to search against that and log that and run those with intersections against some of our counter data and help provide sort of recommendation algorithms in a way similar to what you guys saw this morning with the team of John and Luke. Those things have enabled us to those things have made our life easier because the operational administration of Solar and of Spark, which would normally require Hadoop, is actually kind of a pain in the butt. So because we already know Cassandra is actually the devil we know in this case, and we know the headaches that come with administering it, not having to administer another set of distributed systems or two other sets or three other sets of distributed systems has certainly alleviated quite a few headaches. I would say that Op Center helps with that, but I'm not personally a guy who spends a whole lot of time in there, but it can be useful.
Great. So our usefulness for Op Center has acted as kind of a bell curve, actually. It was not useful in the beginning because we were running Op Center on the same cluster we were trying to monitor. Pro tip, don't do that. We were also, just the number of tables just wasn't making it happy. And so then we fixed those things and we saw a lot of value from it. But then we're large Librado and Grafana users. We use Librado for long-term historical metrics, and then we use Graphite and Grafana for 1 second or 10-second resolution metrics, which we keep for up to 7 days in our data center. And we actually have seen more value out of pulling JMX stats out of there because we're able to more easily join that against other stats from our application stack. We are very interested in possibly using Solar. You asked earlier why we went to Cassandra. I forgot to answer that. We use a lot of Elasticsearch, and we were trying to do things on Elasticsearch that thou shalt never do.
What are those things?
Pretty much all the types of queries I already described previously. Like, it was trying to pull out too much data. We were trying to do non-inverted indices with a inverted index. Even today, I question very heavily our usage of Lucene and potentially Solar, just because all of our data is highly structured. We don't do analysis with Lucene, and it's just kind of unnecessary. So we might actually end up implementing an inverted index through a sparse matrix on Cassandra instead. We won't be doing Hadoop because we banned Hadoop. We also banned Zookeeper, and we've already got Spark running. We basically take data off RabbitMQ 10-minute batch into S3 and then pull that into Spark because Spark streaming was just ooming and leaking file descriptors, and seems like it'll be really cool in 2 years. Why'd we ban Zookeeper? I'm trying to decide whether or not to do the kind of pithy, ironic response or the actual one. But yeah, the actual one. So the actual one is we have very few pieces of our infrastructure that are actually master-slave. And we've had too many prior experiences of putting Zookeeper into a split brain situation and having associated pain. And it's completely unnecessary. All the compute in our stack, we live by a kill-9 life cycle. So it really wouldn't be that helpful for us. As far as the rest of what we consume in DSC, we've enjoyed the kind of security components, and we've also enjoyed some of the performance patches, but also mostly Sebastian. Yeah, he was a feature.
We'll put that on the website. It's good to know that a security company uses the security features in the DSC, so that's good to, it's like a checklist item there.
So we use, outside Cassandra, we use Spark and we use Solar. When we were introducing Cassandra at Channel IQ, a lot of people, existing employees at Channel IQ, like, well, we shouldn't use Solar, we should use Elasticsearch. To which I was like, well, why do we manage another thing when most of this functionality is built into DSC? Over time, they kind of saw those ways, and we stuck with Solar, and it's worked. We use Spark for everything from text analytics to generating visitor analytics for different graphing purposes that we provide to our customers, to matching products to one another. We use Ops Center to monitor everything, to run repairs, which sometimes work, most of the time not so much. Yeah. What else? I think that's it.
All right, so I don't use any of these things in production, but a lot of the DSC integrations, when you think about the Apache suite of open source products, you can wire all these things together, and sometimes it takes duct tape, and sometimes versions change. And one of the things that the DSC gives you is just time to value and simplicity. And so, with a couple APIs, like you guys saw this morning, a couple API calls, you have search and you have analytics on your Cassandra data, and a lot of customers, all of our startup customers are enjoying that and are benefiting from those.
So sorry about that, but Eric just made the comment that, and I quote, "You hit the jackpot with him," referring to Sebastian, and my rebuttal was he's proof that either luck or God exists, maybe both. But he's been a blessing to hundreds of startups and really knows his stuff. Go ahead.
So I actually want to make a point of this because I don't think anybody really, unless you've gone through hell as a startup, and when I say gone through hell, I mean like some startups have a little bit of trouble. They'll get like, a website outage, and like it's annoying, and it might be the end of the world if your startup is just a website. But if you have like serious back-end infrastructure and you've had downtime or really big problems with that, with serious infrastructure, you actually have to sit and question a lot of times, like, am I going to be able to survive this? Is my company going to be able to survive this? And Sebastian has spent probably, I would say, to give you an idea, if he was married, he would be divorced now. He has spent that much time with, my company alone, and had to spend overnights, work, late nights in our office, and we're just one of however many hundreds of startups that he's had to work with. And I would say that on the whole, the talk that I'm giving tomorrow is really 95+% a result of his being able to be a part of like a full-time employee of my company, as well as DataStax and at least these two guys and everybody else. So if nothing else that you would take away from this, like, understand that having access to somebody like that is incredibly valuable, even if they are not a full-time employee of your company. So now you can continue.
And we do not actually list him as a feature of the startup program on the website, but we could put it on there. You should. Turn it off. I know. All right. I'm not that smart. It happens. All right. So why don't we actually go through and just briefly talk, because the point of this was a little bit like the good stuff is stuff that we're not up here to preach the good stuff. You can read the marketing material for that. This is actually, I'm trying to convey things that would be lessons learned of things to either pay attention to if it ever happens to you, or things to avoid altogether. So, and we've done a panel like this at each of the startups where it's basically like the horror stories. This one just got appropriately titled slightly nicer than what it's been in the past. Why don't you go through and talk about, a really, really bad experience, but at the end there, take us through like why it was bad in sense of like what could you avoid it or what should have been done, so the audience can learn how they could avoid that if it ever happens again. And you're going to be good.
I have a lot of them.
You have so many bad stories about it. Why are you still?
That's a great question. He asked it, if I have so many bad stories, why am I still using it? Well, the answer is that like a lot of the technical problems that my company has to solve, there aren't really solutions. And the thing is that like in order to build a company that is a technical company, sometimes you have to solve problems that don't really have solutions, and that's hard. And you take the best of what's available and you make do and you hope that it works. And like there's a lot of that. And there's a reason that Matt and I have become such good friends over the past 4+ years, because we've hit some really hard times. And I could tell the story of counters up here and like the hell that it's been through for us for many years, but if you're really interested in how we solved that, like I'm gonna do 40 minutes on that tomorrow morning. I think it's much more interesting to, rather than tell a very specific horror story, to kind of convey the idea that like sometimes there's no ideal solution and sometimes shit will hit the fan, and the best you can do is sometimes it's the anti-pattern. Sometimes it's, breaking the rules. And everything that we've had to do over the past 4+ years to solve the hardest problems have been breaking the best practices and breaking the rules. And the biggest thing that I can say as a takeaway is, not telling us, without telling a specific story, is the best thing you can do for yourself is understand your use case to the point where you can understand your failure cases to the best of your ability, and then figure out how to break the rules to make them work. And that sounds incredibly counterintuitive, but after 5+ years of breaking rules left and right, I can tell you that you have to know the rules in order to break them, and it takes a company to push the limits like the way DataStax is. I feel like a fanboy in a very weird way, considering how much like bad stuff I've been saying over the years. You have to learn you have to learn how things are done the right way in order to learn how to do things the wrong way, and we've done enough stuff the wrong way in order to make it the right way. It's counterintuitive, but I feel like anybody up here would just nod their head and be like, yeah, that makes sense. And until you've been through the fire, it actually really, like, it doesn't make sense until you've been through the fire.
I'm blanking somewhere on what the original question was, but tell a horror story? Okay, so...
preferably about Cassandra, but if you want to go up...
Yeah,
into
no, it's about Cassandra. So we originally had this brilliant... So I've worked with a lot of other databases. My prior company was a database company. I had a very fundamental concern coming in to doing time series on Cassandra, where everybody was telling me, hey, use TTLs. And I'm like, well, no, the whole point of the database is to not delete my data. I don't trust Cassandra because of all the horror stories I've heard, much like this, because I don't trust when the Cassandra community implements a feature for the first time. And and so I just was going to basically go in and do data cleanup myself and reclamation. That was a very bad idea. We got into a situation where we were running our 36-node cluster of I22XLs at like 85 to 90% disk utilization per node for a very long time, and we're playing all sorts of compaction games. And then this horror story got even worse when we had some other issue in Cassandra that caused queues to back up in RabbitMQ. And so then we were just playing this ping pong game of like, all right, well, we need to clear the queues because some company had spun up 2 agents to monitor servers that, because of the forking mechanisms and just how I/O worked on their box, it almost tripled our ingestion rate into our pipeline from 2 servers, right? And so we were fighting that fire, but then we realized, oh crap, we're trying to optimize this queue to write faster into this thing that's about to run out of disk. And so we were basically just going back and forth for a good 7 days of not sleeping and fixing that. But I love Cassandra.
Actually, I can tell. Yeah, along those lines, I'll tell one quick horror story because that reminded me of a very entertaining one. So,
How'd you fix it?
So part of the moral story was to set TTLs, but that doesn't actually fully fix the problem because of all the sessions of this week on DTCS problems. We were also on size tier compaction. That was another problem. The moral of that story was it's very hard to pick out just one because there was, like many things, there was 100 micro fixes to go and address the fundamental problem. I think one of the things Sebastian alluded to earlier was that there are so many tunables in Cassandra itself, and then toss in the JVM, which is just fucking black magic. And you're in a world of pain because we're a startup of people who haven't done large-scale operations of Cassandra before, and literally it's like Pete Cheselak, Mr. DevOps, and me. And the rest of the people are doing what they should be doing, which is building product and value. And it's the 2 of us just making it work. And we way understaffed Cassandra. I mean, anybody going into Cassandra, if they're going in with less than like 2 or 3 full-time engineers who really understand data model, JVM, and operations of the cluster, I can't recommend it. We have come out the other side of that tunnel through all the fires and everything, and now Cassandra is one of the most stable, happy parts of our polyglot data platform. But she was suggesting, like, there are moments when you're sitting there fighting fires, you're like, wow, I really hope this works. I think it will. It's probably fine.
And I will say, in terms of the ecosystem, the first Cassandra Summit was 5 years ago. This is the 6th one, and there were over 6,000 registrants. The first one had about 145 people. So the ecosystem's gotten bigger. And one of the really nice things about a bigger ecosystem is there is a partner network now, or let me phrase, it's not even partner network. There's an ecosystem of people, of companies whose sole job is to actually run other people's Cassandra deployments as a service, whether that's in a public cloud or managed on your own hardware. If I would highly recommend, unless you really want to, don't run it yourself.
Well, there's that, but as part of this, since there's a startup panel, like, that's not affordable. And it's very hard as a startup where, the ratio of engineers to databases is already bad enough for us to then go out and bring in contract to hire or just contractors or MSPs or anything. It's really not a cost-effective model for us.
I just don't think you're a good negotiator, but that's a different discussion.
I'm never going to pay for this product,
The question was around JVM and special skills or details.
There's way too much content in there. I would say you get really fine-grained in the metrics. So this is just general JVM stuff, like get really fine-grained in the metrics, really understand all the different Eden space, et cetera, Parnu. Like, if you're going to go roll out Java 8 or you're going to go roll out G1 GC, like, he's been telling us to roll out G1 GC for months, and we haven't because it actually slowed down our ingestion rate, and we've had to go back and finally tune things to try and figure out where that actual problem is coming from. So it's a blanket statement outside of Cassandra, but just don't trust the JVM. So we're using DataStax Enterprise on Ubuntu 12.04 and we're using Java 7, maybe. Sure. No. No. Yeah. Well, okay. No Java comes with it, but
Anything you download, you have to download separately with just because Oracle, like that's your choice. But I think the huge takeaway from that is monitor and instrument every single possible thing and worry about whether or not you've over-instrumented or over-monitored later, because that will probably never be a thing. I was going to tell a story, but I'm going to let Ilya go because we're getting the sign.
And whenever you do yours, I'd actually maybe touch on some of the previous technology you used and that led you to use yours before you get to the horror story, because you have a very interesting past with other databases you've used.
Yeah, so when I came into Channel IQ, it's a company that started off in SQL Server, decided that SQL Server could no longer handle kind of the load from the types of things that its customers were looking for. And so Channel IQ raised a bunch of money, decided that they're going to invest in a big database system and create a whole new product. Spent $10+ million, hired tons of engineers, spent a year and a half building this on top of MarkLogic, which for those who haven't heard, MarkLogic's probably biggest customer is healthcare.gov, and that probably went about as well as it did at Channel IQ. So Sam's in the audience. He's got a lot of experience with the SQL side and the MarkLogic side, and we actually turned off all our MarkLogic instances a few weeks ago. We bought a cake to celebrate the death of MarkLogic, and nobody could be happier. So yeah, but as far as our horror stories, I mean, we've used DSC for years. I could tell you that you guys do a great job coming up with features and marketing them, and they never work. So I'll talk a little bit about one recent case. So Ops Center launched this feature of like performance services and slow queries, and sounds great, right? It's going to help you find the shit that makes your stuff run slow, and it'll help you fix it. Sounds amazing. The only problem is when you turn it on, it'll crash Cassandra eventually, and eventually became every 6 hours for us. And when you go turn it off, it actually doesn't turn off. And then when you tell us to Sebastian, he goes, no, it should turn off. Can't be that. And you point him to the source code in DSC, and you tell him, no, it's right there. It doesn't turn off. So yes, I would say our biggest lesson is, yeah, even though we wait for like fixes and whatever the next version is, some of the default stuff and what launches in new versions, it usually doesn't work the first time around.
Can I throw something in there? A couple of years back, right before the New York City Cassandra Summit, I had a node decommission, like it just decommissioned itself, and I woke up in the middle of the night to the node just going like just decommissioning, and the port 9160, the CQL port, stopping listening. And I was like freaking out. I'm like, I don't know who in my company would decommission a node without talking to me. I started going through bash histories. I was flipping out. Like, what is going on? And then I started digging through the logs, and I found a log entry that said, out of disk space decommissioning. And apparently, at some point, someone in DSE, on the DSC team, thought it would be a cool idea to just, when the node runs out of space, to decommission the node. Like, just remove itself from the cluster. And so I woke up and freaked out. And I sent this bug report to, at the time, I don't even remember who it was. We've had so many people help us over the years.
Tyler fixed it.
Yeah, I think it might have been Tyler Hobson. And, it's Tuption. And I sent it to somebody, and he goes, there's no way we would do something this stupid. So he forwarded it to someone else, and the email thread was just 5 or 6 people saying, that there's no way, someone else must have done it, there's no way someone would do this stupid. Then someone found the patch, and they did a git blame and removed the name from it, and they were like, no, we did it. We're not telling you who did it, but we did it. And so we've had some very entertaining DSC feature stories over the years, too, where nodes just like to disappear.
All right, so one thing with the performance services, it does turn off if you set it to 0, all right? You just have to set it to 0.
Not off.
Just saying. Yeah, you do. All right, but no. So to be fair, I do get a lot of cries for help. Let's call it that. Kind of like, hey, we're in a firefight. Help me out. It really helps when those come with like a full stack trace, right? With like some information on what's hot OS-wise, with like a little bit of background on what's actually wrong rather than my node died kind of deal. I mean, sometimes that's actually what it is, but very rarely. So I think I'm going to do a talk tomorrow on like things that I see very often with the startups, hundreds of them. And at the end, I think I want to spend some time just outlining ways that you can get faster at getting the problem and get better at digging yourself out of a hole, potentially with the startup program's assistance. So I do encourage that.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience that anyone would like to ask really quickly, right up front? If you scream it, I can repeat it. What's up?
Okay, so
The
he has
question for the video was, and I quote, date time compaction.
no date tiered.
Oh, date tiered compaction. Oh God, why? I think.
Okay, so to be fair, the idea of date tiered compaction is actually really, really good. The problem is the implementation is really, really bad. In the absolute best case scenario, it's bad. And the folks over at I can remember his name. I can't remember the company. I said it before. You remember? Okay, that's fair. So, oh, I remember it now. So the folks over at CrowdStrike did a really good job of elucidating why date tiered compaction is a complete and utter failure in its current instance. To the point where, like, for example, if you do anything with any sort of streaming, so a bootstrap or remove, which is another side horror story, we couldn't remove or add nodes for like 2 years. It's not an exaggeration, actually. It was like 2 years. To the point where if you remove or add a node or any sort of streaming thing, it triggers a major compaction everywhere around the cluster. So date tiered compaction, when they get it to work right, is actually brilliant for time series data. And as he'll be able to tell you, like, it will massively reduce your I/O. But if you're in his use case, it'll reduce your I/O. If you're in our use case, it'll quadruple it. So it really just depends on being able to be smart about the pattern you use and understanding the implications, rather than saying, this is a good idea, I'm going to go ahead and implement it, and then like being like, oh, I don't know why it didn't work, because you don't really fully understand like the hell you just imparted on yourself.
So I wouldn't go quite that far, because I do think one component of DTCS that is really good is that it's better than size tier compaction.
In some cases is what
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So like, for us, for our use case, we insert only. That's our entire data model. We never delete, we never update. Bankers don't use erasers, right? And so date tier compaction strategy does a very good job of combining data and then dropping it. The problem that we run into is that it combines too much data, and the calculus you need to do to figure out why it would combine data the way it does, I don't fucking have time for that. It's in a lot. It was a very clever solution to what should be a very simple problem, right? I was able to implement something on InnoDB, MySQL. Like, I went and implemented a object store on MySQL like it was 1995, right? But it was very simple because you're able to create tables per days. You're able to partition based on time. Like, being able to bucket based on insertion time, that's all that we wanted. And once it times out, to actually unlink the file. Like, I would have loved to build that on Cassandra, but I could not reliably reclaim disk. As a time series data company that sells based on a retention period, if I sell you 15 days of retention, every second I hold past that 16th day, that's just cogs I'm letting out the window. That's all margin.
So this is the end. We have no more time. But first and foremost, I'll say two things. This group of guys up here, as sarcastic as they are and as blunt as they can be from time to time, also represent some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. They're some of my favorite people on the planet. And, well, 3 of the 4 of you are. You can guess which one. And they know this stuff inside out. I think these guys would be hired by any company on the planet virtually any time if it wasn't for your less than award-winning personalities here and there. With that said, if anyone does have any questions and want to deep dive on anything, I think you two have speeches tomorrow on the ends. Yep. Do you have one, or did you do it? No?
No, I didn't qualify.
You didn't qualify, I'm sorry. And you had one today, right? Yeah, so I would definitely recommend seeing them. I think they're great speakers. Actually, I haven't seen you speak, but you're a good speaker. You're good in private, at least. So, And then I think we're also going to go over to the hotel bar for a drink if anyone wants to deep dive on any of the technical stuff, or just learn whatever's in their brains, because it's a mountain of knowledge that they have. So thank you guys as always. We'll repay it with Sebastian's time, and we'll go from there.